Good afternoon, economics learners. Welcome to today's economics lesson. My name is Letiane LG, and this lesson is brought to you by the Free State Department of Education in collaboration with Pagama Research and Development. Today we're going to be focusing on the main topic, which is contemporary economic issues of the day, and that relates to you and I. That these topics of contemporary economic issues, we see them each and every day, so it could be very easy for us to enjoy this lesson and relate to this lesson because it involves the subtopic, which is inflation. So you know that money is involved there. Okay. As always, we expect at least you should be knowing the participants in the circular flow as well as its function. How are they interrelated? And those participants, as a reminder, or as to remind you, the households, who are the owners of factors of production, and they render those factors of production to the firms, the government, as well as the foreign sector in return for income that they will spend to buy goods and services, or the income, part of the income they will save it. And we know the other participants is firms or businesses. In this regard, we know that the businesses spend in purchasing the factors of production from households, and also they earn the remuneration for selling goods and services, pay taxes to the government. The government, on the other hand, also buy the factors of production from households, and also they purchase public goods and services from the business so that they can offer them to you and I as public goods. The foreign sector, we need it for the mere fact that resources are not evenly distributed, of which some of the resources the other countries have, we don't have in South Africa. So therefore, there's a need for us to trade with the foreign sector or with the international markets for the mere fact of exports and imports. But in this case, we'll be focusing on the monetary terms, which is how does money flow in terms of exchange of those goods and services, which later on we'll be talking the issue of increase in those prices of goods and services. Also, we say that at least you should be knowing forecasting under the business cycle with regards to the expansionary measures that are taken by the government. For fully, we know that if the economy is not doing well, expansionary measures of fiscal policy and monetary policy will be applied so that we can revive the economy that is not doing well. Okay, contrary to that, we may apply restrictive measures where we see now the economy is overheating or the economy is at the peak. Then therefore, we may need to dampen that economic activities by increasing interest rates so that we can reduce money supply, by increasing taxes and reducing government expenditure. So this is the knowledge that we say you have acquired it when you're doing topic 1 and topic 2. It is still applicable even now. Also, the two government policies, as a reminder, it is the monetary policy that is controlled by the Reserve Bank, and also the fiscal policy that is controlled by Treasury. So these policies, we know that under the monetary policy, we've got the two instruments, which is interest rates as well as money supply. Below that, you'll apply the open market transactions, cash reserve requirements, moral suasion, etc. Then under the fiscal policy, that's where you'll be talking about government spending in a form of transfer payments, or you call it social grants, in a form of subsidies for both businesses as well as individual households. And also, where we'll be talking about the issue of taxes that may be applied, and those taxes can be your progressive income tax, which is payee, or the indirect taxes such as your sin tax, custom duty tax, wealth tax, and also the direct tax, which is the company tax or corporate tax. So this is a pre-knowledge that we're saying, let us apply that, but here we are discussing the movement of money. How does money get involved to a point that you and I end up getting the goods and the services that we require? So this is the pre-knowledge grade 12. It's still applicable when we go forward. Okay, so here the lesson objective or what is expected of you. We're going to be analyzing or investigating inflation, the policies that are used to get rid of or to combat inflation. What is inflation? The types and the characteristics of inflation. What causes inflation? If inflation is already there, or we are experiencing an increase in the prices of goods and services, what will be the consequences of those to you and I as the consumers, to the producers, or to the economy at large? Okay. Therefore, we look at the measures now, or the tools that we can use to combat. So the word combat there says to get rid of inflation, or to make it, to bring it to target. Then we'll also be discussing inflation targets as set in South Africa. Okay, so this is our lesson objectives, grade 12. It's expected of us to cover these things. What is inflation? The types and the characteristics of inflation, the causes of inflation, the consequences of inflation, measures to combat inflation, and lastly, the inflation targeting, whether we've been successful or not successful. Okay, the terminology is very important for our subject. As I said to you, that we need it for 1.3 under section A, question 1. We also need it in section B, in the middle question, where we say briefly describe the concept, maybe inflation, core inflation, etc. Then also, these concepts, we need them to start our essay in section B. Okay, just a thought. I want us to look at this, or maybe it can be a homework or something that you can do it now, to say, just find out, to say, in South Africa on average, how much was the price of bread around 2018, 2019? And how much is the price of bread now in 2024? Repeat. Check how much was the price of bread in 2018, 2019, and how much is the price of bread now in 2024. Check whether that price has increased. If yes, is it within acceptable increase? Or if it has decreased, if yes, is it within the acceptable decrease? So those are the things. And if it has increased, what causes that price of bread to increase, and rapidly so? So those are the questions that you need to ask yourself. But here I'm just looking at one of the items that can be included in the basket of groceries that ordinary South Africans need each and every day. Okay, so let's look at this terminology now, grade 12. Inflation, it's a sustained and significant increase in the general price level over a period of time. Simultaneously, a decline in the buying power of money. So you can put that in as it is, or you can just say it is a sustained and continuous increase in the prices of goods and services over a period of time. That is a definition of inflation. So inflation targeting now, that forms part of the monetary policy that is set by the government and is managed by the Reserve Bank to keep inflation within the target or within range, as said by the Minister of Finance. We need it to be between 3 and 6%. So a question would be, what would happen if the inflation rate is below 3%? Or what will happen if the inflation rate is above 3%? Now, I can also take you back to topic 2, where now you're talking about Philip's curve, the trade-off between unemployment as well as inflation. You discussed the consequences there to say there should be a trade-off where we can accept a certain level of inflation while we are still trying to reduce unemployment. On the other side, while we are still trying to reduce inflation, we can accept certain level of unemployment. So hence it was said to say, if inflation can fluctuate between 3 and 6%, probably we can achieve the desired outcome of economic growth, full employment, exchange rate stability, price stability in South Africa. Demand pull inflation occurs when the aggregate demand for goods and services now exceeds the aggregate supply of those goods and services. So this demand pool relates to consumers, households. It means if the aggregate demand, which is as a result of you and I demanding more goods and services, if it's more than or exceeds the aggregate supply, then demand pool inflation start to occur. On the other hand, we have got what we call cost push inflation. So this one talks to production now. Okay, so this one talks to production, where we're going to be saying occurs when there's an increase in the general price level caused by increase in the cost of production. So it talks to the producers or the suppliers that brings these final goods and services to you and I in the markets for us to buy. So as those prices of inputs there increases, they are likely to also increase the prices, which therefore cost push inflation starts to occur. So in this page, I'm saying to you, inflation, just a definition to say, refers to a sustained or general increase in the prices of goods and services over a period of time, while inflation targeting, it's where we target inflation between 3 and 6%. And the desired output of this inflation, it should be at the midpoint of 4.5. So inflation midpoint, we are targeting the inflation to be at around 4.5%. If the Reserve Bank can achieve an inflation at that point, we can now say the economy is stabilized and we can see an increase in terms of real GDP over time. Then I'm also saying that the issue of demand pool inflation relates to you and I as consumers, you and I as households that buy this particular goods and services. So it gets to increase if supply does not react to that increase in the demand for goods and services. But on the other side, we have got what we call cost push inflation. This one relates to the producers that produce these goods and services. And therefore, we are saying if the input prices increases, ultimately the output of that will increase, and that is cost push inflation. Then we also have got what we call headline inflation. Then this inflation is an inflation that is not adjusted to consumer price index figures. Core inflation excludes from the basket, CPI basket, items that are highly volatile or are affected by government policies. So we're looking at that. That is the key word when you define core inflation here, grade 12s. You'll tell me that it excludes items that are highly volatile. Those are the items that are highly sensitive, or their prices fluctuate almost every now and then. We'll discuss those. We'll provide examples of those goods or services that are part of the core inflation. Then hyperinflation, I think the name says itself. Hyperinflation talks you to say it's inflation that is very, very high. It's out of control, and the increase in the overall prices increases rapidly and substantially so. This one is also known as the runaway inflation. Here we say an inflation that is above 50%. It is hyperinflation. So another name for hyperinflation, we say it's a runaway inflation, or an inflation that it's out of control. All-inclusive inflation, here we often need to check the changes in the prices of all final goods and services that are produced in a particular year. And we are not only looking at the selected basket. So when we are saying all-inclusive inflation, we are saying what happened to the general prices of goods and services overall in the economy. Then we can find a value or a figure that says all-inclusive inflation. Administered prices, we are saying these are the prices that are set or controlled by the government. We'll also discuss part of those prices that are set and controlled by the government. So again, as a recap of the slide, headline inflation, we are saying this one has not been adjusted to CPI figures. Core inflation, it is that one that excludes in the basket, exclude items that are highly volatile. Then hyperinflation is an inflation that is so high to a point that it gets out of control, or we say it is a runaway inflation. All-inclusive inflation, here we are looking at all the prices of all goods and services within the country. We are not only looking at a selected basket of goods and services. Then administered prices, you will say those are the prices that are set and controlled by the government. So these concepts are important, economists, because you need them for match column, you need them for multiple choice, as well as economic concepts in section A. So that in that section A, when you are given 30, it should be 30 out of 30. But that usually it's a problem when you get to 1.3. Why? Because we forget to at least master these economic concepts. Deflation now, on the other side, is the opposite of inflation. Occurs when there's a general decrease in the prices of goods and services. So that's the opposite of inflation. Stagflation, here I say high, high, low. What do I mean by that? It's a situation where there's high unemployment rate, high inflation rate, but experiencing low economic growth. So stagflation is high, high, low. High unemployment, high interest rates, high inflation rate, as well as what? Low economic growth. Then we'll be saying the economy is stagnant, it's not moving. Consumer Price Index, which is the CPI, this one relates to you and I as normal households in South Africa. It measures the price of a fixed basket of consumer goods and services, what you and I purchase in a normal month in South Africa. While the Producer Price Index assesses the impact of changes in relative weighting of production of inputs there. That is why I said, at the end of the day, for us to experience or for us to have a final product, labor should be part of that product, where you're going to charge the price of labor per unit to say how much did it cost you to produce that particular product. You're also going to look at other inputs such as your overheads. Here we are looking at electricity costs. We are looking at water. Also, we are also looking at transport and petrol costs. All those things included, they help us to assign a price of a particular product. So if they increase, it means that the prices of goods and services are going to increase also. That is why it's important for us to monitor the Producer Price Index, not only to focus on the Consumer Price Index. Okay, so how do we measure inflation? The change in the price levels are measured by means of price indices. These indices shows average change in the prices, quantity, or value of group of items over a period of time. Then there are three ways of measuring inflation. If the question says to you, name any two ways to measure inflation. So there are three ways. The first one is by means of indices. Here, we look at average price level in the economy that is measured in the form of an index or a price number. And then these prices are expressed or represent a range of goods and services that are needed to be recorded on a regular basis. It means each and every time the Stats SA collects the prices of these particular products as they get to the market, and then they get to measure that, then they determine the value of inflation over a period of time. So this is the first way of doing it. We are looking at the indices. That means the price of each good as it gets to the market or as it leaves the factory and arrives in the market. That is how it is monitored. The second one, it is the issue of weighting. And then here, it reflects the relative importance of an item. What do I mean by that? You look at consumer goods or what households usually purchase in a normal month. And then after that, you put them in a basket. And then from that basket, you assign them weighting to say which one is important relative to the other. For example, here, I've said, if you look at housing and food, and we say in this weighting, we're going to give or assign food to be 50%, and we're going to assign housing to be 25%. So we can tell that food are relatively important in this basket. That means consumers or the normal households usually spend most of their money in food as compared to housing. So this weighting tells us where we put index numbers to make those figures to be comparable in another ways. So at the end of the day, whatever basket that we are putting or whatever items that we are putting into this basket should give us at least 100%. We will select transport, school fees or education, food, clothes, housing, put them in a basket, and then after that, assign weightings to them. The weightings are assigned relatively based on importance. Okay, so let's look at this practical content or this practical example here. We are saying here it's weighting of a CPI basket. So as you can see, housing and utilities, that means those are rates and taxes. In this particular basket, they take about 21%, followed by food and non-alcoholic beverages. That means your drink, your water and everything. They take around 18%. And then transport, it's 17.8%. I'll just select randomly. Down there, we've got what we call recreation and culture, where we're going to go and have fun. It takes around 3.9%. Then restaurants and hotels is 2.8%. Education, 2.2%. Health, 1.5%. So here, the issue of weightings are put based on the relative importance for that particular economy in South Africa per se. If you can look at the issue of expenditure on or importance or spending on household and health, it's relatively not that much of important as compared to the issue of housing and utilities, your rates and taxes. So when we measure inflation, once this has been assigned, the following year, we get to check the shift in terms of the percentages to say, where was it? Then we reallocate the issue of weightings in terms of importance. So in a different year, some can enter into this basket, some can go out of this basket. I'll make an example in terms of 2020. During 2020, most of us were not traveling, we were working at home. So in terms of the weightings and everything, transport wouldn't be of that importance in South Africa. It means it was going to shift and move elsewhere. Probably education would have shifted up and healthcare would have also shifted up because of we needed medication and also we needed to spend on education. So the issue of weightings, it's another way of calculating inflation in South Africa. How much did I pay this year? How much am I paying this year as compared to how much was I paying a year before that? So this is the weightings grade 12. Then the other one, we are looking at the inflation rate. Here it can be calculated when we do what we call consumer price index and figures have been set there. There are ways that is there to calculate inflation and it's always expressed in an annual rate. What do I mean by that? We look at a particular month with the index with the corresponding month in the previous year. That is why we always say inflation is expressed on year. It's an annual inflation. What do I mean by this, grade 12s? when we see inflation figures increasing in South Africa, each and every month, Stats SA publishes inflation figures. But when we compare those, we will be saying, when we say inflation is high this year, we are not comparing July and June of 2024, but we are comparing inflation of July 2024 against July 2023. So that's why we are saying it's year on year. And the figures of inflation for August will be issued in September, where we are going to be comparing August's inflation in 2024 against the inflation in 2023. So it's year on year. Although it's published monthly, but we are comparing a different year to a different year. We are not saying we're going to be comparing August 2024 with July 2024. That's not how inflation is expressed. Hence, we are saying it is year-on-year basis. What was inflation last year in July as compared to inflation this year in July? Then the difference there, we can say inflation is within target or inflation is above target. Okay, and then we know that is expressed in percentages. So as a recap, the ways of measuring inflation, it's by means of indices, weighting, as well as the inflation rate. Then the types of inflation, the first one is consumer inflation. This one we say it's a headline inflation, where we say it represents the cost of a shopping basket of goods and services of a typical average South African household. What is it that in a particular month we as South Africans put in that particular basket of our grocery, in other ways? Not forgetting that when we do the particular budget, transport is there, fees are there, food are there, entertainment and recreation is also part of that particular basket. In short, where do we spend our disposable income? And how much are we paying for those particular things this year as compared to last year? That is consumer inflation. And as I mentioned that it is published by the Stats SA, they do 5 things. The first one is to identify and select goods and services to be included in the basket. So, the practical example that I was making, in 2020, because of COVID, transport wouldn't be much of a problem because most of us were working at home. So you would shift your spending elsewhere. So therefore, it means transport was going to go out of the basket, but something else, probably spending on data and calls, would be part of the basket. So you identify and select goods and services that are to be included in that particular basket. That's step number 1. Step number 2, you assign the weighting of each good or service. There you are indicating the relative importance of that particular basket. Hence, I would be saying that in the previous example, we realized that particular basket, housing and utilities carried more weight at 21%. Then the others followed, where we saw that the issue of health was the least allocated at 1.5%. Number 3, you decide on the base year to calculate your CPI on. Then number 4, decide on the formula to calculate the CPI. Then number 5, you decide on the collection of prices thereof. Lastly, you calculate inflation rate, which is also known as the headline inflation. So the first thing that you do is to select goods or services that to be included in the basket. Secondly, you assign weightings based on their importance. Then after that, deciding on the base year. And currently in South Africa, so to say, we are still using 2015 as a base year. Decide on the formula to calculate the CPI, collect the prices to say, hence when I started, I said, just check to say the price of bread in 2018, how much was it? And then the price of bread in 2024, how much is it now? Then we can determine the difference there, express it in a percentage form, we can determine our inflation. And then that inflation is also known as headline inflation. Okay. Number 2, now we said this one is a core inflation. Why? It excludes items in the CPI that are highly volatile. What do I mean by that? Which goes up and down rapidly. Every now and then. As you can see that in South Africa, the price of petrol changes each and every month. So items include food, petrol, and electricity. So those are the things that we are saying. When you are calculating core inflation, these items of food, petrol, as well as inflation will be excluded from calculating the issue of CPI then. Number 3, it administered prices inflation, where we said these are the prices that are set and controlled by the government. The prices that are of goods and services that are set and controlled by the government. There, we look at the issue of assessment rates, property tax, the fuel prices, the issue of electricity, telephone lines rentals, the issue of TV and radio licensing, vehicle registrations, school fees, school boarding fees, etc. So all these things are regulated and controlled by the government. Those we are saying, those are the administered prices or administered price inflation. So these are the examples. Under core inflation, items that are highly volatile are excluded from the CPI, such as what? Food, petrol, and electricity. Administered prices are the prices that are set and controlled by government. We know that in South Africa, for Eskom to increase tariffs, they must apply to NERSA, which is the National Energy Regulator of South Africa. And then also we know that the TV and radio are also governed and controlled by ICASA. So all those things are regulated and controlled by the government. The issue of our license disc, registrations of vehicles, those are set and controlled by the government. The government determines on when to increase the price and how much it should be based on economic conditions. The CPI X, the key is there, the word X there. It's an inflation that is excluding mortgage interest rate from the basket. So it's still CPI, but this one is CPI X inflation. This is an inflation that is calculated by using the CPI, but excluding mortgage interest rates from the basket, where we say they are independent because you look at the mortgage interest, sometimes they can be fixed for a particular period or for a long period of time. So if we can include them in the basket, they may not reflect or give us a true value of those inflation. So up to so far, if we can recap, we've got what we call headline inflation or CPI inflation. Second, we've got what we call core inflation, administered price inflation, and the CPI X inflation. Okay. Then we move away from consumers, now we come to producers. Under producers, we've got what we call the PPI, that measures the price at the first significant commercial transaction. For example, these are the prices of imported goods that are measured at the point when they enter the country to say, how much are they? We're going to be talking about input costs, such as the cost of material, the cost of equipment as they enter the country. The ones that are going to be used as intermediate goods to produce goods and services or to produce final products. The manufactured goods are priced when they leave the factory, not when they are sold to customers. What do we mean by this? The producer or the suppliers, before these particular goods and services can leave, or before these goods can leave the factory, they would have assigned costs to each item to say the cost of direct and indirect material. This is how much. The cost of overheads such as your electricity and water. This is how much. The cost of transport, the cost of labor, both direct and indirect. When you add all those together and then you divide by the output, it will give you the price per unit. Then they charge what we call VAT or input VAT on the other side, so that when they leave the factory has already been priced, not when they get to the consumer on the other hand. So let's look at the difference now between the CPI and the PPI. Consumer Price Index pertains to the cost of living, which is you and I are affected by this. So households, this one pertains to cost of living as well, but now, or cost of production, not living. So this one's it's businesses. Here we are looking at consumer goods and services, but here we are looking at goods only and not the services. So that is the difference there. Capital and intermediate goods are excluded, but here capital and intermediate goods are included. Intermediate goods are the goods that are used to produce final goods and services. So you use them as input so that you can have an output at the end of the day. In terms of consumers, you and I, we're not even going to think what was involved to make a loaf of bread. We're not even going to think of that. We're just going to go there. If the loaf of bread is 18 rand, we're just going to go to the till, pay, and leave. But on the producer price index, they look at all the factors that were used so that that loaf can be a final product. The issue of water, the issue of electricity, that is why we're saying intermediate goods are included when you are calculating PPI, but intermediate goods and capital are excluded when you are calculating CPI on the other side. CPI include VAT, while on the other side, they exclude VAT. Interest rates are taken into consideration because services are already there now. Here, interest rates are not taken into consideration. It means they're excluded. The price of imported goods are not shown explicitly, while here the price of imported goods are shown explicitly. It means we want to determine to say if there's a key ingredient that we don't have in South Africa that we imported from another country, we need to determine it, or we need to show it separately because of the issue of exchange rates, so that we know that if the rand depreciates, for us to bring that ingredient again, it's going to be expensive. But if the rand appreciates, it means we can stock up that ingredient and have it in our country. But that will be determined by the exchange rate. Hence, we show it separately when we are calculating PPI. But as final product on the other side, we're not going to check how much it cost to import a particular product. We just want to see how much is the end product. How much is the end product? That's the only thing that we are looking at. Hence, we are saying the price of imported goods are not shown explicitly. On the other side, they are shown separately. So, okay. All-inclusive inflation on the other side. For an implicit GDP deflator, the GDP figures at current prices and constant prices are used as they are published in the national accounts. So you might be aware of this when we're doing your circular flow model, the national accounts and quantitative elements. The issue of GDP at constant price as well as GDP at current prices was also touched there. Okay. So we're going to be looking now at the difference between the nominal GDP as well as the real GDP. What are those indicating, or what will happen to the prices? And therefore, the inflation rate of the economy as a whole. That is why we are saying here is an all-inclusive inflation. We are not only going to be focusing on that particular basket of goods and services, but we're going to be looking at a basket as a whole to measure economic growth at constant as well as current prices there. Okay. So if we can also look at the difference now between the nominal GDP figures as well as the real GDP figures here. Under nominal GDP, we know that it's also known as the market or as the money value, while on the other side, real GDP is also known as the national product at constant prices. What do we mean by the constant prices as well as the nominal prices here? Nominal value of production is calculated by multiplying the volume of the final goods and services by their prices. Here we are looking at the rate of inflation that is expressed by the consumer price index, and that has to be considered. The real values on the other side of production are the nominal values of the national product that are adjusted to price increase. So it means the other one includes inflation, the other one does not include inflation on the other side. And you and I will understand that we use these nominal values or nominal figures to get the real figures on the other side. Hence, we are saying the nominal values, inflation has not yet been taken into consideration. It means the prices are still as they are when the goods leave the factory, but on the other side, these ones have been considered, or inflation has been taken into consideration. So the real national product is the national product that is expressed by prices which are applied to a certain base year. So you choose the base year, then after that you can calculate the difference between the nominal as well as the real GDP values. So here, these ones, they do not give us the true reflection of whatever that is happening in the economy, because inflation has not been taken into consideration there. So hence we are looking at the issue of constant prices and the current prices. Now grade 12 is very important here, because a paper can say, explain the difference between current prices as well as the constant prices. Now we've seen many times where learners think that when we are saying current prices, we are saying prices of now. And they will tell you that no, these current prices are the prices that are very, very current. And when you ask them to say what are constant prices, they will say they are the prices that do not change, they remain constant. No, in economics, the issue of current prices, we are saying it is the prices that have not been adjusted to inflation. While on the other side, we are saying the constant prices are the prices that have been adjusted to inflation. That is the difference there. Not to say current prices are the prices of now and constant prices are the prices that do not change. That is not how we do it. So we just need the understanding. It means there are current prices because they have not been adjusted to inflation. There are constant prices which are also known as real values or real figures. These ones have been adjusted to inflation. Okay. So let's look at a practical example here. In South Africa, given values there, we are looking at GDP at current prices, and also we are looking at GDP at constant prices, and GDP deflator there, base year is chosen to be 2005, which is at 100% there. So to calculate inflation rate, we still apply the same procedure of calculating to say it's the current year minus the previous year divided by the previous year multiplied by 100. So I always say, in short, if you want to do letters, you'll say it is C minus P divided by P multiplied by 100. So that's an easier way of remembering inflation. Current minus previous divided by previous multiplied by 100. So let's say we were to calculate the inflation rate for 2024. You would understand that in 2023, the GDP deflator there was sitting at 145, which is this one. In 2024, the GDP deflator is sitting at 156. So we can now calculate our inflation. It means we need to determine this inflation rate of 7,6. Hopefully that we are having our calculators, so you will work with me. Then you will say current minus previous divided by previous multiplied by 100. In this case, we'll take our GDP deflator of the current year, which is 2024. Hence, we are having 156 there, minus the previous deflator of 2023, which is 145, divide by the previous deflator of 2023, which is 145, multiply by 100. Now the mistake is here, grade 12s. Sometimes we want to punch everything in a calculator, and there's those calculators that cannot read, or the memory apply BODMAS right there and there. So when they apply BODMAS right there and there, your answer might be incorrect on the other side. So division might come first or multiplication might come first before you solve the equation. Then you just go to your final answer. If you go straight to your final answer, grade 12s, some may get a wrong answer. Hopefully you are working with me, and check if you punch everything in a calculator, will it arrive to the value that we want or not? If not, do it step by step. Say 156 minus 145. Press enter so that you can get the value. The value that you are getting, you divide it by 145, press enter, you'll get a decimal value. Then that decimal value, you multiply it by 100. So first you solve whatever that is here at the top step, get the answer, then you divide, get the answer, then you multiply by 100. Then after that, your answer would be final. Hence, we've said here, it's 156 minus 145 gives us 11. Then we're going to say 11 divided by 145. It's going to give us an answer of 0.758 multiplied by 100. And then the answer that we're going to get there, it is 0.758. No, it's 7.58 rounded off to one nearest place, which is 7.6. So if you look at that answer there, it is the same as the answer that is provided there. So this is how you calculate your inflation values at grade 12s. This is our 4 marks that we can simply get if we do this in a question that says for us, calculate inflation given a table above or something. Then we know that at least we've got our 4 marks there. Current minus previous divided by previous multiply by 100. It will give you an inflation value there. So if we were to analyze this practically, so we fully understand that inflation target in South Africa is between 3 and 6%. So if we look at in the year of maybe 2022, automatical tells us that we're beyond our target. It means inflation overshoot beyond. So I want you to start thinking, what will be the consequences of this inflation being above 6%? Further, it went more in 2023. It went to 8.2. That means inflation was going to around 10%. What will be the consequences of that? Probably after that, you could be saying, after that in 2024, the government would have applied certain measures that are there to get rid of inflation or to combat inflation. Hence, we see that inflation was starting to decrease now. So those are the things that you should start looking at when you are analyzing a data response question. An alternative way of doing this, you will be looking at another method where we say it is the GDP deflator of 2024 divided by the GDP deflator of 2023. So we are looking at that, which is 156 divided by 145 multiplied by 100. Then the answer that we are getting there, it's 107. Then from the 107, remember at the top there, we selected a base year. And then we said a base year of 2005, it's equivalent to 100. So every time when you do this alternative method, remember to minus the percentage on the base year. So we get there where we said it's minus 100. And then the answer that we are getting, it is 7.6. So that 7,6, it is still the same as that one. Although preferably, we say use the first method to calculate inflation. But even the second method, where we are using GDP deflator, still gives us the correct answer. But then you need to remember to minus your base year, the grade 12. So those are some of ways of calculating inflation. Then we've got what we call demand pull inflation. Here I mentioned that this demand pull inflation talks to you and I as consumers. If we demand more, the price of goods and services are going to increase. Remember aggregate demand and aggregate supply when we're doing inflation and unemployment under the new economic paradigm. So we would see that demand and supply is at equilibrium, where the price is 15 rand and quantity demanded is 800. So if there's an increase in demand, aggregate demand will shift to AD1, where the quantity demanded shifts from 100 to 150. But that becomes a problem now. As much as aggregate demand increases, prices of goods and services are going to increase. So whatever that we used to buy at 15 rand, now we are buying it at 18 rand. Why is that the case? It is because supply has not reacted to an increase in demand, or it is because demand exceeds supply, in other words. So the desired output, grade 12s, it is at G there. Why there? We want a situation where when demand increases, supply reacts to that increase in demand. But in this case, before that, we'll be saying it is a situation where too much money is chasing few goods. Demand increased from AD to AD1. Supply has not yet reacted. The price of goods and services are going to increase. To avoid that, because inflation will occur, the desired output should be at point G there, where we can see an increase in demand as well as an increase in supply, but the price remains constant at how much? At 15 rand. So that is the desired output. So what can be the cause of an increase in demand? The first one, increase in consumer or household spending. And we understand that when there's an increase in disposable income, the demand will increase much faster than aggregate supply for the following reasons. Number one, we spend less, we save less, and we spend more on goods and services. So it's a situation where there are less savings. Most of our income goes to demanding of goods and services. That will cause an increase in the prices, which is inflation. So increasing consumer spending because of disposable income, that leads to inflation. The next one, reduction in taxes. Although we understand that taxes are high, but once taxes are reduced, people have got more disposable income. That disposable income, they spend it in buying consumer goods and services. In that way, the demand increases more than supply. The prices increase, inflation occurs. Number three, easy access to credit. If we are able to borrow money, and everywhere we are able to use credit cards, that in other ways, spending also increases in a way. So someone you may say probably they are not working, but if they can get access to credit, the demand for goods and services is going to increase. So these three factors here under consumer spending causes an increase in inflation. Number one, less savings. Number two, reduction of taxes. Number three, easy access to credit, because we will be having money, but that too much money will be chasing too few goods. The second one is the issue of investment spending, where we're saying low interest rates may result in an improvement in the sentiment and profit expectations, where we say businesses invest more, and this may lead to an increase in demand for goods services that are part of that particular investment. So if there is low interest rates, we understand that demand is going to increase. Even businesses, they will demand or they will want to invest in certain things that such as new buildings because it's easy for them to afford them. Why? There is low interest rates. Building requirements such as cement, bricks, as well as labor. With lower interest rates, it means they can even buy more or they can hire more labor. They can buy more of the bricks. They can buy more buildings. In that way, that demand, if it exceeds the supply, we know that prices are likely to increase, and that leads to inflation. Number 3, government spending. We fully understand that if there's a continuous government spending without aggregate supply, that will lead to inflation. Although, yes, we want government to spend, especially on key inputs such as your roads, housing, education, as well as the social grants. We were wondering to say, why is inflation becoming so high while people are not working? But we understand that some of those are because of the expenditure by the government through the transfer payments, social grants, and everything. Hence, we even said, now we have opened to an access where people are now getting access to reconstruction, access to the benefit to the reconstruction and development programs, transfer payments, housing, as well as the issue of free education. So all those elements, grade 12s, are the ones that are driving prices to increase in a way. Number 4, it's the issue of export earnings, where we say an increase in exports. Earnings from exports can come in various ways. Number 1, foreign growth, where we see more trading partners, and in that way, where they need the demand for those goods and services. In that way, that will cause the price of goods and services to increase locally. Commodities, in terms of those that are demanded, the world demand for commodities expands, contracts such as the business cycle do. Where we say during the expansionary period, that means where we want the economy to be higher, foreign demand increases, and this leads to increase in export volumes. When increasing export volumes, there's the demand there of those particular goods and services that are produced in South Africa. That will also affect us locally, grade 12s, because we also buy these locally produced goods and services, in other words. The income earned from these exports leads to an aggregate demand as well as increasing in prices. Then we look at the cost push inflation now. So we focused on the demand pull inflation, where we said under the demand pull inflation, we're focusing on consumer spending, which is households, investment spending, government spending, as well as earnings from exports. So under cost push inflation now, this is where we say, what happens at the factory? What happens during manufacturing? How are the prices calculated, or how are the prices determined? For us to have a final product, what is it required? For us to have a loaf of bread, what is it required? So all those inputs that are there, if the price of bread increases, we now have to say, it means cost push inflation took place, or the input costs or the factor costs had increased, in other words. So in order for businesses and producers also to stay in business, they are compelled to pass this higher production cost on who? The consumers. So we are the ones who are at the receiving end now, in terms of buying or purchasing at higher prices. Why? Because the businesses want to survive. So for them to survive, they will have to cover all those costs through us. So you and I will buy the final product as expensive because businesses want to make profit, they want to pay tax, they want to pay labor, and they want to survive in terms of infrastructure development. Let's look at now the causes of cost push inflation. As we have said, the quantity demanded and supplied, it is at 150, while the price is at 15 rand. So if the price increase from 15 rand to 18 rand, what will happen to supply? The supply will shift from AS to AS1, and quantity supplied and demanded will decrease. What makes that to decrease? It is because of increase in prices of inputs. Hence, we said that for businesses to stay competitive, they will have to increase the prices of goods and services. So those prices of goods and services affect you and I as consumers, where we said before the price increase, quantity demanded and supplied was at 150. Now, when the price increase, quantity demanded decrease from 150 to 100. Hence, a new equilibrium is formed at E1, where we see a shift or a decrease in supply. Why? Because of an increase in price. Okay, so there are numerous ways or numerous things that affect or that create cost push inflation. The first one is the increase in salaries and wages, of which we know that we may strike or unions may negotiate for better salaries and wages. And once that happens, we know that the producer will increase the selling price to compensate the higher input costs. So now one would be asking to say, so it means salaries should remain fixed forever so that we don't incur inflation. The answer is no to that great 12. So we are looking at other variables that causes an increase in inflation. It's not only salaries. Increase in profit margins. So the businesses also, they may say, this year we achieved a 20% target. Next year we want to achieve a 50% target. So if they want to increase the profit margins, therefore, the cost of production will increase and the products will be more expensive. Okay? Then number 3, increase in the price of imports. Like I've mentioned, that we need intermediate goods to produce final goods and services. There's a certain equipment or machinery that we South Africans do not have. We need to import it from maybe Germany or Russia, for that matter. If the rent is depreciated or it's depreciating, that also tells us that for us to bring that material or that equipment to South Africa, it will be expensive. But we also need to make profit on the other side. We need to pay labor. So if it is expensive, the price of that equipment will be included in the price of the final product that you and I as consumers buy. Then that causes price to go up, which becomes expensive, inflation. Okay. The issue of exchange rate depreciation, I've mentioned that to say if the rand depreciates, imports becomes expensive, especially those that we are saying they are intermediate goods on the other side. Okay, number 5, decrease in productivity. So if the productivity decreases while the remuneration of factors of production stays the same, the unit cost will increase. Hence the policy that says no work, no pay. Because the productivity stops, but at the end of the month or at the end of the week, you still pay full salaries. With which output you would have sold what on the other side. So if that still happens, where you see productivity decreasing, but prices, wages or remuneration remains the same, those prices of goods and services, you will find a way as a business to recover the losses. And the only way to recover the losses is to make the product or the service to be expensive. And when it becomes expensive, you and I as consumers are affected in that particular way. Natural disasters, these ones we do not plan for, such as floods, droughts, and extreme weathers. Those will have an impact in the cost of production. So once we have experienced natural disasters, we stop operating maybe for a week because we cannot get access to the building due to rain or due to floods. In that way, for the following week when we come there, we will need to work double to recover the losses that was made by the floods. Or the alternative is to limit supply of the products that we still have in stock. And to limit supply of the products that we still have in stock, we have no choice but to increase the price. When you increase the price, we know that demand decreases. But the price remained at high. It means those who depend on that particular product will incur higher prices, which will lead to inflation. Okay. So number 7, an increase in interest rates, where businesses will have to pay more for the loans. That increase in interest rates will be added to the selling price. That is why we always fight through the monetary policy to say, let interest rates decrease so that also the cost of production will decrease. And once the cost of production decrease, the final price or the selling price of a good and a service will also decrease, which will be much easier for you and I to purchase those particular goods and services. So if interest rates increase in a country, it has a negative impact on the economy as a whole. First, on the production side, and then lastly, on the consumer goods and services. The strikes and stay away, that reduces production output and causes drop in supply. If employees close the shop or the strike outside the factory and there's no production that is taking place, we know that production supply will be less than demand. And in that way, for us to regain, prices of goods and services will increase. There's another one, shoplifting and losses that are caused by employees. These ones are also added to the price of the product. Okay. An increase in administered prices may also result in a trade unions demanding higher wages. This one we've touched it as well. If the price of petrol increases, if the price of food increases, if the price of electricity increases, employees may strike or may have a stay away in demand for better wages. Okay. So number 9, we are looking at an increase in tax, both direct and indirect tax. So taxes such as VAT, custom duties will be added to the selling price, which contributes to inflation. And increase in direct taxes may lead to producers to increase the prices and to offset their extra burdens. To who? To you and I as consumers on the other side. And the high cost of inputs as well in the agricultural sector, such as diesel, fertilizers, all those are added to the price of the product. Okay, so in another words, grade 12s, we are saying this cost push inflation, anything that acts as a driver before the final product is produced, it's a cost push, will lead to a cost push inflation. Taxes, price of imports that are used as intermediary goods, reduction, increase in interest rates, all those other things, strikes and everything will lead to a cost push inflation. So here we want to determine what is it that caused inflation, or what is it that it's an inflation driver. With that, grade 12, we have got what we call an activity here. We've covered most of the activity when we're explaining. Surely it will take us 5 minutes, and that 5 minutes will start now. Welcome back, grade 12s. First things first, before we can attempt to answer the questions, we just need to analyze the data that is given to us. Hence, we are saying it's a data response question. So when we are looking at there, it's if we add all this, we'll get 100%, which is the headline inflation there. And then we are looking at the indices, of which we've selected the base year to be 2021 at 100%. Then we're going to be looking at measuring September 2021 against September 2022. Remember, I said this inflation, it's year on year when we are looking at that. So we've got what we call CPI for all goods, durable goods, semi-durable goods, non-durable goods, as well as services here. So these are the types of goods that we are having. Okay, then analysis of September 2021 and analysis of September 2022. So again, here we'll be looking at the difference or the changes as it goes this way. So when you analyze those things, you also look at the weighting here. Out of the 100%, you check which one is given the most weighting and which one is given the least weighting. If you look at CPI for all goods, it was at 48.68. That means all this added together, which is the durable goods, the semi-durable goods, and the non-durable goods. And then we also have got services there at 51.32. So let's now attempt to answer the questions. Now you'll be marking with me. So the first one says, identified one example of items that is excluded from the CPI basket. So we know that those are food, fresh and frozen meat and fish, interest rates, the issue of vegetables, VAT and assessment rates. So all this are excluded from the basket of calculating CPI. Okay, then the second one says, from the table above, which type of goods have more weight? Fully we know that those are the services, because services are allocated 51.32. So you get a mark for that. Briefly describe the term consumer price index. So consumer price index, it's an index that is used to measure the price of a fixed basket of goods and services that are relating to the issue of or the cost of living. Or you can say those are the prices of goods and services that exclude, this ones include interest rates and this one includes VAT. Or this ones we can say, mostly we say they relate to cost of living. That is the most relevant answer that we want there. Then number 4, we said briefly explain the impact of cost push inflation in the economy. So cost push inflation, if it's high, it's dangerous to the economy because higher prices are combined with the decrease in the national output. Okay? Or you could tell me that it will lead to instability, where there will be strikes, or where there will be strikes where people demand better wages so that they can keep up with the demand, the increase in terms of prices, in other words. Then the other one we say, calculate inflation rate for all goods for the period from the period of September 2021 at September 2022. So here we remember we said it's the current year, which is 2022, minus the previous year, which is 2021, divide by the previous year, which is 2021, then you multiply by 100. Now, if you look at here, grade 12s, for writing the formula, you get a mark for that. So it's very important for us to start with the formula. Many are times where we just punch everything in the calculator, substitute, and get the final answer. But it is advisable that when you are writing, especially when we said calculate something, you start with the formula for that particular calculation. Okay? So we'll say 108,5 minus 98 divided by 98 multiplied by 100. Also, that gives you a mark. Then you substitute. Remember, I said to you, in your calculator, do not punch everything at once. You will say 108,5 minus 98. Then you get an answer. That answer that you get, you divide it by 98. Then you get an answer. Then you multiply by 100. Your final answer there is 8.5%. So we would realize that those particular goods excluding services in September 2022, the inflation rate was at around 8.5% there. So this is your analysis, and these are the type of questions that are relevant, or this is the type of questions that would be typically be asked, as this question paper was taken from last year's prelim exam, grade 12. It is still relevant even now. And inflation, it is a question 1, paper 2, a question 3, paper 2, and also question 4, also question 6 under the essays there. Okay. So this is the calculation, and I hope that we all got our marks, or I hope that we all got our 10 out of 10 here. So let's look at now the consequences of inflation, grade 12s. Inflation is not all bad. So this is your possible essay, or this is your part of the essay that is there. The first one, which we say consequences of inflation. So inflation is not all bad, grade 12s, where you thought that no, inflation is really bad. No, there's some gains and there's some losses to others when there's inflation. Now I know you're wondering to say, but what do you mean say when you say inflation is not all bad and also it's not all good? Let's first start with the first participants there, which are creditors as well as debtors. The debtors benefit from price increase, while creditors suffer due to price increase. What do we mean by that? Let's say you borrow money today, then you're going to pay that money in 6 months' time. So we fully understand that when inflation increases, the value of that money today and the value of the money in 6 months' time, it would have been different. Where we say the debtors, the person who borrows money today, will benefit from that the borrowing of the money, but during the time when they repay, the money would have lost value because of inflation. So contrary to that, when inflation increases or decreases to a point where we experience deflation and other prices of goods and services decrease, we will say creditors will also benefit because the value of money today and the value of money in 6 months' time would have been different. Let's look at salaries now, as well as redistribution of income. Price increases affect people whose incomes are relatively fixed. So if we live on a fixed salary, it does not change every month. There's no commission added, there's nothing. If this price of goods and services keeps on increasing, we are also affected in that way, grade 12s. So that way now the budgets are also affected. So inflation increases, it's bad for those people with fixed salaries. That includes also retired people, pensioners, and people who live in transfer payment. Because if I can ask you now to say how often does the price increases, but you look at the issue of pension, it remains relatively the same. For those who earn transfer payments, it was changed in April, it's going to be changed in October again. So during these other months, it means when the price of goods and services increase, we are affected as well. So these are the consequences of inflation. First, to the creditors and the debtors. Secondly, to those who earn fixed salaries as well. Okay. Also, investors and savers, where we see a decline in real savings. Assets with fixed nominal values, a large portion of the wealth of those individuals is held in a form of fixed value. Fixed interest rate yielding claims such as fixed deposit, company debentures, as well as government bonds. If they are fixed or they remain constant for a particular period of time, by the time you access your savings or investment, it will have no value because inflation would have captured or would have catch up with those investment. So hence we are saying that also investors and savers are affected by inflation. But it would be better if whatever you have saved or fixed for a very long period of time or a long term, if inflation or the price of goods and services decrease, you will benefit as an investor. Because a person who had saved $1 million in 1990 would say, I had benefited from $1 million. But today, if we withdraw $1 million from the savings, it has no value anymore. Why? Because of inflation on the other side. Okay. So we explain this. Then taxpayers on the other side. With inflation, the taxpayers' nominal incomes, which is wages and salaries, rise even when their real incomes remains unchanged. So the issue of prices increasing, you also pay VAT, which is included there. Then when you keep on paying higher taxes, while whatever that you buy in terms of goods and services remain the same, you are also affected. I will make an example. When you are having 200 rand, you actually take a trolley to enter a shop. Today, when you are having a 200 rand, you request a plastic. And at some point, you might not even request a plastic in other ways. Why? Because of the price of goods and services increased. And portion of income also went to taxes on the other side. Industrial piece. Now here, if the price of goods and services increase, employees are likely to strike. And that will lead to mass action. And then also, that will be a spillover into violence and affect the society at large. So that is the consequences of inflation, grade 12. It is not something that is good to the taxpayers, and also it affects industries because they will strike, demanding what? Better wages to keep up with inflation. Number 6, we are looking at the buying power of money decreases, where I said to you here, it's less money or too much money, less money, leading to a point where you require too much goods, but you cannot afford them as such. So the value of money here decreases, or the buying power. You end up buying very few. Hence, I was saying that if you've got 200 rand, or if you had 200 rand in 2015 as compared to 200 rand now in 2024, you would realize that the money has lost value. There's a saying that if you had 100 rand, just break it into pieces, it's gone in 2 seconds. So you rather keep it like that. Probably it will gain value as time goes on. Government income through taxes, that also leads to an increase in inflation. Okay, then number 8, the issue of unemployment and poverty increases due to an increase in prices, which may result in less demand and less supply. So if there is less demand of the particular goods that are supplied, the companies are forced to lay off some of the employees because now there's no affordability anymore. And if that happens, when workers are laid off, it means unemployment increases. And the very same people were the breadwinners where they come from. Now they cannot be able to afford basic goods and services. Number 9, we also have saying inflation has an adverse effect also on a country as a whole, or in a country's balance of payment in a way. So grade 12, those are the consequences of inflation what we can say now as part of the work that you need to do is to go and look at the measures or the ways to combat inflation. The measures or the way to combat inflation, it's your homework, and then up until we meet, or possibly remember those measures or ways to combat inflation. It's our possible essay in this topic. So the two topics that we are having, it is the consequences of inflation, and the other one is the measures to get rid of inflation. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time. Goodbye.